Hello everyone. I'm the narrator, and I'm here to accompany you through another long night. I know, you're probably using this video to sleep. But before your eyes close, try to answer me one thing: where are you, and what time is it? Because if you hear something strange tonight, if a door closes with no wind, if you feel like someone is watching you through the screen, then remember, you chose to listen to this story. Story 1: Silence of the Basement. I drifted between the thin line between waking and dreaming, as if my body was supported by the old wooden walls and the whispering fabric above my head. Something was swaying. Something was caring for me. When I finally woke up and climbed out of the wooden cradle, it was dark. Hours had passed without me noticing. My body felt strangely light, as if I had been reborn. Not a normal sleep, but a cleansing, a state completely beyond the biological possibilities of recovery. But my mind was different. It was uneasy. Something was wrong. The experience was too full, too profound, like I had accidentally touched a space that humans should not enter while alive. I told myself it was just the beginning. But the nights after, I went back to the crib. And then again. And then again. Each session took me deeper into sleep. And not just sleep, it was like I was falling apart. I wasn't me anymore. I was just a stream of consciousness dissolving into something vast, quiet, and welcoming. I began to dread the day. Normal sound sounded like the roar of an engine. Other people's words became a meaningless cacophony, like birds arguing. I craved the absolute silence of the basement. The silence that was as thick as velvet, as thick as water. Sleeping in a regular bed became impossible. My body felt stripped away when I wasn't in my crib. I called in sick more often. I started spending my days in the basement. And then I started seeing them. The clothes on the wall, just old rags at first. But now, as I walked down to the basement, they moved. Gently. Supplely. As if waiting for me. I saw the shoulders swell. I saw the inviting movements, as if an invisible form was dancing inside. I no longer walked to the crib on my own. I was led. With gentle gestures, invisible hands on my shoulders, turning me at the right angle, forcing me to curl up. I did not resist. I did not want to resist. They knew exactly how I should lie to feel most comfortable. Left arm under my neck. Right leg slightly bent. Head tilted to the left, heart up. That position sent me into a deep, coma-like sleep. One night, I experienced something I cannot describe, except in one word: voice. Not in sound, but as a direct stream of consciousness poured into me. A voice whisper inside me. It told me about Cornelius Hawthorne, the previous owner of the house. He spent his last years in this same cradle. He had gradually let himself go. No longer a man, but a creature who accepted silence as part of his existence. Voice doesn't just tell, it invite. It told me there were others. Souls that had been torn by awakening, that had been crushed by the burden of sobriety. They were at rest now. They had melted into the basement. It told me I could join them. I just had to let go. Let the cradle hold me. Let my clothes protect me. Let the silence wash over me, until there is no distinction between sleep and death, between me and them. When I opened my eyes, dawn had broken. I had been in the crib for more than 12 hours. But it felt like I had only closed my eyes for a few seconds. I look in the mirror. A stranger looks back. Pale skin. Sunken eyes. And a smile. Soft. But twisted. Just like the smile Cornelius Hawthorne was said to have died with. I realized I had to seal the basement. Not because I want to. But because a part of me, the part that still remembers I'm human, is screaming. A primal survival instinct urged me to escape before it was too late. The basement isn't just giving me sleep. It's teaching me oblivion. Teach me how to die slowly without knowing I'm dying. I found a contractor. I lied about mold. About structural collapse. About needing to seal the basement forever. Before the silence within began to whisper to me in me own voice. I began to carry with me an indescribable doubt, one that came not from sound, light, or space, but from time itself. Every morning I woke up in my cheap rented room, I noticed my clock slowing down, not by seconds, but by memories. I was no longer sure what day it was, or how long I had been here. All I knew was that the silence was approaching. It was no longer a place. It was an entity. A thought. A call. I began to see the crib in my dreams, no longer in the basement, but in the middle of a wasteland, or in an abandoned train station I had never been to. Other times, it was in a white room, with no door, no shadows. But each time I heard the sound of cloth against wood, the unspoken whisper of hanging clothes, and the hand, always the hand, gentle but firm, on my shoulder, inviting me back. I began to realize something. I wasn't the only one who had ever gone down to that basement. I found an old newspaper article in the local library, a nearly rotten piece of news about a strange disappearance in 1984. A woman who had rented the house for the summer had disappeared without a trace. The police found nothing unusual, but recorded a neighbor's statement. She said she slept very well. So well that she didn't want to wake up. A few days later, I discovered a blog that had been taken down, leaving only a web cache. The writer, a single man, described a haunted basement. Even after moving out, he could still hear the rustling of clothes at night. He wrote, "I don't remember how I left there, I just know I'm here and this body is no longer definitely mine." I read all those lines in silence. I get it. The silence does not lie beneath the house. It has left the place. It now takes the form of a contagion, an abstract parasite that clings to memory, to sleep, to the desire for peace. I decided to go further, this time not just to run away, I wanted to know what it was. I contacted Cornelius Hathorn. Not by mail. Not by email. I came there. What sent a chill down my spine wasn't the fact that he was still alive, it was that he seemed to be, waiting for me. His house was in the middle of the hills, miles from the nearest town. He was not surprised when I told him my name. He simply asked, "Can you still hear them?" I nodded. He smiled sadly. "So you get it. That silence was real. And it was hungry. I didn't sleep that night." He told me about his research, about the coincidences between sleep disorders, mysterious disappearances, and his recurring drawings of a subterranean room, a crib, and hanging clothes. There were diagrams. Notes. Everything. But the last thing he said before I left almost drove me crazy. "You never leave the basement. No one ever leaves. You're just, temporarily allowed to dream you've escaped." I swallowed and turned to face the urinal, trying to ignore the feeling of the hairs on my neck standing up. The whisper could have been the wind. Or the old ventilation system. Or my imagination. 3 in the morning was when the brain started to make up stories to itself. Under the fluorescent lights, the water in the sink reflected my face in an unfamiliar way. My eyes were sunken, my skin pale, my mouth slightly open, as if I had just come from somewhere airless. As I turned on the water and walked to the sink, I glanced in the mirror. And I saw a door behind me slowly opening. My heart was pounding in my chest. I turned around immediately, but the door was still closed. Nothing had changed. A mirror was just a mirror. Or was it? I stepped back, facing the mirror. In the mirror, the fluorescent lights above me flickered wildly, but in real life, the light was steady. The odd phase shift sent a chill down my spine. I reached up and tentatively touched the surface. It was cold and damp, like wet metal. Then the light in the bathroom went out. I stood frozen in the pitch blackness. For a few seconds there was complete silence, the only sound being my heartbeat in my ears. Then I heard breathing. Not mine. The breath was slow, long and soft, as if something was brushing across the back of my neck. I backed away until my back hit the cold brick of the wall behind me. The phone. I pulled it out, its cracked screen glowing a faint blue, enough to see some of the room. And I saw a figure standing in the mirror. Not me. Not anyone I've ever seen. He was taller than me, hunched over, long hair hanging down over most of his face. His reflection was in the mirror, but in reality there was nothing. I turned my head, saw nothing but an empty room. But when I turned back to the mirror, he was still there. Closer. I gasped, my fingers shaking as I touched the flashlight icon. The light flashed on, and the room was empty again. The mirror was normal again. I couldn't stay another second. I rushed out of the bathroom, my heart pounding so hard I thought my ribs would burst. The hallway was still as long as a bad dream. As I passed room 241, a sound came from inside, someone moaning, screaming. No, it could be the TV. It could be something normal. I told myself again. Everything was explainable, if I tried not to think about it. I pushed open my door, slipped inside, and slammed it shut. My breathing quickened, and I realized my roommate was sitting up in bed, eyes wide in the darkness. "Do you hear anything?" he asked, his voice whispering. I didn't answer. I didn't know where to start. He looked at me for a few more seconds, then lay down, pulling the blanket over his head. I climbed into my bunk bed and curled up. But as I turned off the flashlight, a knock came from behind the wall behind my bed. 3 sounds. Slowly. As if someone was knocking from the other side of the wall, in a place where there was no room at all. I lay still, my heart still pounding as if it were trying to escape from my chest. The whispers still echoed somewhere, lingering in my ears like the echoes of some strange concert I didn't remember attending. I tried not to look at the mirror, not to think about the eyes and mouths that spoke for me. Sleep came late, in limbo, half awake and half asleep. In my dream, I found myself standing in a hallway that seemed to have no end. Each door had a cat's eye attached to it, and as I approached, I saw eyes inside peering out. Not people. Just eyes. Deep, wet, and waiting. The next morning the sun never really rose, it simply dispelled the darkness. I woke up with the feeling that someone had left the bed next to me. But the German's luggage was still there. The bed was empty, without a trace. I stepped out into the hallway. Everything seemed normal, almost deliberately so. The musty smell was still there, the fluorescent lights still hummed. But there were no more hallucinations, no more whispering. I told myself I was imagining things. I'd heard of acoustic trauma. Old buildings sometimes produce low-frequency sound waves that affect people's psyche. Maybe I was just the victim of some unexplained physical phenomenon. But reason is not enough to completely remove fear. When I returned to my room, my roommate's bed was made. No backpack. No clothes. No trace of presents. I went down to the front desk to ask. "Who are you talking about?" the counter girl asked, frowning. "Your room only has one person registered." I was with a German guy. He arrived before me. About 6 feet 1 inch, blonde, didn't speak English very well. The clerk typed into the computer. She shook her head. "There is no such person on the list." I snickered. There must be some mistake. I slept in the same room as him. I even talked to him when I checked in. The clerk pursed her lips, then showed me the footage from the hallway camera. In the video, I was alone. Entering the room alone. No one following me. No one sharing the bed. I don't know what's scarier, the fact that I'm being scammed, or the fact that I'm losing my mind. The second evening, I decided not to leave my room. I locked the door, drew the curtains, and lay in bed with a small pocket knife that I carried with me when I traveled. I didn't turn on the light. I wanted to see if the darkness had anything to hide from me. Midnight. I woke up to the sound of running water. But not in the bathroom. The sound of water came from behind the wall at the head of the bed. That was the wall separating the room from the other side, according to the floor plan, and there were no plumbing fixtures. I pressed my ear to the wall. The sound was like the steady, dry drip of water from an old faucet. Then the voice spoke. Clearly. "You were the first to see me," it said. The sound had no emotion, but carried a presence. "I have waited a long time." I recoiled. There was no one in the room. There was no one in my head. I was sure of it. The walls began to seep. Not water. Something thicker. A dark liquid began to seep from the seam between the walls, dripping onto the floor like rotting sap. I could see, in the dim light from the fire alarm, that it was forming something. Letter. Free. I rushed out of the room. The hallways were now endless, with no end in sight. The windows were gone, replaced by dusty blackboards with unfamiliar mathematical formulas and diagrams that looked like neurobiological maps. I run. I saw the doors begin to open one by one. Each room revealed a slice of reality: a child standing in the snow looking at me, an old man slumped over an operating table, a woman in a wedding dress suspended in the middle of the room by red threads. They all turned to look at me as I ran past. I screamed. But no sound came out. The exit at the end of the hallway was a metal door that opened onto a fire escape. I ran down, losing count of the floors. The numbers on the wall repeated themselves: 3rd floor, then 3rd floor, then 3rd floor. The building had trapped me in a loop. And at every turn of the stairs, I saw myself. Myself. Standing there. Looking up at me. Not moving. No talking. Don't blink. I didn't take my eyes off the mirror for nearly 10 minutes. My breath was imprinted on the glass, as if it were also trying to converse with the imprisoned presence on the other side. Every time I rubbed my eyes, the reflection became clearer: not me. Another me, with speaking eyes and a pleading expression, as if it understood that I was its only door to freedom. Then the bathroom light flickered and went out. I reached up and felt the wall for the switch, but there was no power. When the light came back on a few seconds later, the mirror was completely blank. No streaks of steam, no strange reflections, no vague messages written in breath. But the feeling being watched still not gone. I started digging into the history of the building. An old motel on the edge of town, most of its tenants stayed just a few nights, a stopover, not a destination. There wasn't much information online. No public murders, no prominent hauntings. But I did find a faint article from 12 years ago: plumber disappears while renovating basement of Belmont Grand Hotel, body never found. The name Belmont Grand gives me the creeps. That's where I'm staying. I took the article to the front desk, pretending to ask if it was true. The woman on duty that day, gray-haired, dim-eyed, glanced at the piece of paper, folded it, and set it down on the desk. "It's not a good idea to delve into the past of this place," she said evenly. "It's none of the guests' business. It's none of anyone's business." From that day on, everything became different. The mirrors began to reflect other time during the day. I could see myself standing there, in the same pose, but it was darker, or brighter, or with an expression I had never seen before. Once, I stood still to check, and the reflection moved a few seconds before me. It looked around, then cocked its head to indicate that I should turn around. When I did, nothing. But that feeling, the feeling of being standing right behind but not breathing, did not leave me until morning. I began to understand: mirrors are no longer reflective surfaces. They are gateway. Not all of them were open, but some of them were cracked. One night, when I looked in the first-floor bathroom mirror, I saw my reflection no longer me. A man with wet hair, pale skin, and a scratched face, he looked like the plumber in the article. He was no longer mumbling forgiveness. He was sighing. His hand pointed to the wall behind me, where there was a vent blocked with a metal mesh. I waited until midnight, when everyone was asleep. Using a screwdriver from my construction kit to remove the mesh, I crawled into the narrow vent and down a long pipe that led to the back of the building. The smell of rust and humidity filled the air. At the end of the tunnel was a rusted steel door, locked with an old chain. I don't know why I brought the key I found in the staff room the day before, but it opened. The heavy door creaked open, revealing a subterranean room that wasn't on the building's plans. A room surrounded by mirrors. Each wall is a mirror, but the reflections are not uniform. Some show images of the building's rooms in different moments, as if a film was recorded but never repeated. Others reflected me, but from another perspective. I turned my head, no one was there. But in the mirror, there was another figure standing near me, waiting. On the floor, a strange symbol was drawn in some dried liquid. Blood? Oil? I couldn't tell. In the center was a small, cracked mirror. When I bent down, I saw nothing but bottomless darkness. And then the voice rang out, is my voice. But from the mirror. It's time. You are the gate. I fell, feeling like I was falling into my own reflection. All the noise around me disappeared. No more smell, no more light. Only mirror. Story 2, the other side of the mirror is a memory that never belongs to me. I don't remember exactly when I first heard the whispers. They were like a breath of wind, drifting through the old pipes, echoing through the building like wandering spirits. At first I thought I was just tired, a natural consequence of moving to a new place, an old graduate school dormitory. But as the darkness grew darker and the whispers took on a rhythm, I could no longer ignore them. The bathroom mirror was a large one, the kind that was glued to the wall with edges that had been dulled by years of wear. What made me shiver wasn't my own reflection, but something that always half a second slower every time I turn my head. At first it's just a belated glance, then an uncoordinated blink, a movement of my lips when I'm silent. I started waking up in the middle of the night with the feeling that someone was staring at me from inside the mirror. I tried covering the mirror with a cloth. The next morning, the cloth was in the trash, neatly folded as if I had done it. I carried this fear to class, to group meetings, to my part-time job at the coffee shop. I thought I was depressed or had insomnia. But no doctor or medication could explain why I felt so another smile in the mirror while I cry. And then one night, I heard a knock from inside. From the mirror. Not once. Not randomly. But 3 times. Intermittently. Clearly. Knocked. As I approached, the rising mist created a shape. A line of words seemed to be written with cold fingertips from the other side, I'm sorry. I don't know why I didn't run. Maybe it was because the fear had reached a paralyzing level. Or maybe some part of me had known this all along. I said out loud, who are you? No answer. Only the reflection still looked at me, but this time, its gaze was not steady. In the mirror, I raised an eyebrow. In real life, I did not. It is more free. From that night on, things became strange. The whispers had now turned into words. They echoed in the pipes, in the walls, even in the toilet every time I flushed. Sorry, I didn't mean to, I remember. I began to see reflections in places where there were no mirrors. The screen of a television off, a window in the early morning, the water in a toilet, I was there, but not quite me. On the last night, I walked into the bathroom like a man at his own funeral. There was a roll of thick silver duct tape on the sink. I hadn't put it there. I knew it shouldn't be there. But I also knew exactly what I had to do with it. I began to tape the mirror. Edge to edge. Meticulously, as if I were being hypnotized by some ancient ritual. Each time a section of the mirror was covered, the reflection became more frantic, screaming incoherently. It was screaming something, a warning, maybe a plea for mercy. The walls began to whisper again, louder this time, angrier, like a captive crowd crying out in despair. Sorry. 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 I pasted the last strip. The look in the mirror's eyes had changed. It looked at me like a dying person looking at a loved one for the last time. No more anger. Just bottomless sadness. Then all was silent. There was no rustling of electricity, no rustling of old pipes, no echoes. The room was so quiet I could hear my heart pounding in my temples. I left the bathroom as if I had just escaped an accident. The next morning, I left the dorm. No notice. No goodbye. The receptionists didn't even ask why. They just nodded, like they had been waiting for me to run away. As I pulled out my suitcase, I glanced at the bathroom. The tape had been removed. The silver strips hung like open wounds. The mirror was now clear as new, but it reflected nothing. It did not reflect me. I moved through a dozen places after that. Everything was normal. Mirrors reflected correctly. No more whispering. No more me. But sometimes, between dreaming and waking, I heard a faint sobbing sound from the sewer. A faint writing appeared on the misty mirror, "I'm still here." And as I brushed my teeth, I found myself smiling. A smile I didn't mean to create. I backed away from the coffin, my heart pounding, a cold sweat breaking out even though the air around me was icy. The reflection wasn't me. It had closed eyes, a dead stillness emanating from its posture so perfect, so solemn. It was like I was seeing myself in a moment that hadn't happened, or hadn't yet happened. I closed the hatch before the sun went down, locked the door, and tried to forget. But that night, I dreamed of a knock. Not a door, a soft, steady tap, like fingernails on glass. I woke at 3:07 a.m., with a strong feeling that someone was standing outside my truck, staring. When I pulled down the shade on the small window, there was no one. But I noticed a faint handprint on the windshield, a cold, clear smear of fingerprints. The next day, I returned to the warehouse. I couldn't let it go. The coffin, though terrifying, was work. But I also brought something I'd never thought I'd use, a tripod-mounted reflex camera. I set it up against the glass and started filming, not knowing what I hoped to catch. I wiped the glass, muttering to myself to keep my mind clear. I checked the tape right away. For the most part, the image was just me, working. But at the 14:52 mark, in exactly 2 frames, less than a second, the reflection in the glass changed. I was standing upright, but the image was not. It was sitting up. In the coffin. I froze. I replayed it a dozen times. I zoomed in on each frame. There was no mistaking it. The pose, the clothes, the eyes still closed, but the body was erect. Like, it was starting to wake up. I was about to turn off the tape when I noticed something else. A figure, very faint, was standing right behind me in the frame. Not in the regular shot, just reflected in the glass. Tall, thin, wearing a wide-brimmed old-fashioned hat, and faceless. Not that it was indistinct, there was no face. Just a black void. I ran out of the warehouse that day. I didn't return for 3 days. But a call from Deadwood pressed me. They wanted the exhibit completed by the end of the month. They were willing to pay extra if I took close-up photos of the crystal mirrors for the exhibit brochure. I went back, this time in the morning, with good lighting and a friend in tow. May, a freelance photographer and spiritualist. She worked with cursed objects. She said she wanted to try talking to the objects. When May entered the warehouse, she stopped short. "Something's wrong," she whispered. "Do you hear a moan?" I listened. Wind. Maybe. But then I heard it too, a small sound, like someone sobbing behind the wall. But the warehouse was empty. May placed her hand on the glass. Instantly, she froze, her eyes widening. "The eyes are open," she breathed. I looked. My image was the same, funeral clothes, white lilies, closed eyes. But in the glass, its eyes were half open. Looking at May. I pulled her out. But from then on, May started dreaming. She said that in her dream, she was in that coffin. Unable to move. Unable to scream. She saw me standing outside, head bowed. And behind me, the faceless man. 3 days later, May went missing. The police thought she left. I knew she didn't. I looked at the camera. In the last bit of footage, May was walking slowly toward the coffin. She opened the lid. She climbed in. No one was forcing her. But I saw in the glass, the figure, for the first time, moving. Nodding. No one believed me. No one watched the tape because it automatically broke. I was fired from the project. The coffin was moved. But I don't know where. All the files were gone. I burned the copy of the film. But sometimes, in the early morning, I hear the knock again. 3 times. Soft and steady. I stopped looking in the mirrors. I taped them up, covered them. Because I knew if I looked long enough, would see myself, lying down, eyes closed, and next to me, May, whispering, "It's okay. Let them come." I no longer believe that the whispers are simply hallucinations. They repeated, at first very softly, like the sound of water dripping on a rusty tin roof, but gradually they grew louder, slowly repeating the same strange phrases: "We see, we wait, the projection is not complete." Then one night, as I stood still in the dark with no lights on, I heard them more clearly than ever, voice like me. Not in a random way, but so similar that every syllable, every rhythm, the way I breathed between sentences, it was as if someone was mimicking me from behind the black mirror on the coffin. I was no longer dreaming. I was wide awake, almost too wide awake, my mind stretched, my nerves sharpened like a knife dragged across stone. I stepped back from the coffin, my back pressed to the wall. The mirror still reflected me, but the eyes reflected in it were no longer mine. Something inside was learning to become me, slowly, with every movement, with every word. I tried to leave work. I lied and said I was sick. I turned off my phone. I drove 200 miles away to a small town where no one knew me. I rented an old motel room with tinted walls, no mirrors, no glass. I sat in the dark for hours, drinking tap water and trying to breathe evenly. But at 2:41 a.m., I saw my reflection on the off-screen of the TV in the room, something I had been covering myself with a blanket over since I checked in. My reflection stood there, blurry, but blinked a beat slower than me. I vomited on the floor, a bitter, black mixture that I didn't even remember ingesting. I left town that night, driving without my headlights on, to avoid seeing any reflective surfaces. When I returned to the warehouse, the coffin was facing the wall. A note lay in the middle of the floor, held in place by a rock. The handwriting was stiff and straight, not like mine, but there was something uncomfortably familiar about it. Reflection no longer needs glasses. I quit. Officially. I told my boss that I had a headache, that I needed therapy, that I couldn't go on anymore. I think he saw the fear in my eyes, because he didn't ask any more questions. I locked the warehouse for the last time, but that night, in my own apartment, I found the coffin standing in the middle of the living room. The mirror was gone. Only the dark wood and a thin layer of dust remained, but I knew it still looked at me. Not with its eyes, but with awareness. I felt the presence the way you know someone is staring at the back of your head. Its silence was like a muffled roar, and I didn't dare touch it anymore. That night, I fell asleep for just a few minutes. When I woke up, I realized I no longer reflect. Not in the bathroom mirror. Not in the window pane. Not even in other people's eyes. I looked at them, they looked back, but always passed by, as if the light passed through me without being reflected. I began to fade, not physically, but on the basis of, as if I was being replaced, layer by layer. The voice in my head was no longer mine. It was patient, polite, and kind of grateful. It whispered of a journey completed, that I had borrowed enough time, that the reflection had been nourished, and now it would go on without me. I don't know what happened next. But if you read this, and if you each see yourself in a mirror, but this time you feel like you're a beat slower, get out of there. Immediately. Don't look back. And if you are noti saw my reflection again, it was too late. Perhaps I'm writing this from the other side of the glass. Maybe I'm the one on the inside, learning to look outside again. I thought my job as a body restoration specialist would be a form of escape from the hustle and bustle of life. I worked in a converted cold storage facility in the back of a nearly forgotten funeral home in New Mexico. Every day, I put the finishing touches on anonymous bodies, repairing stitches, smoothing bruises, and sometimes just making them look like a beautiful last memory. I had no one close to me. No wife, no kids, no friends. Just work, gray concrete walls, and the familiar smell of chemicals. Until one day I received an unsigned package, a casket draped in black velvet, marked with an old shipping number. No name, no sender. When I asked, the funeral home said it was probably a mistake order from Arizona. I agreed to keep it in storage for a few days. But the very first night, I saw it move. Just a little. A slight shift in position, as if someone had rotated it a few degrees. I convinced myself I had misremembered, until the next night, when it shifted again, this time a few inches off the wall. I marked the base with a white marker. The night after that, it moved again. No one had a key to the vault but me. No cameras, no alarm system. I began to hear a faint rattling sound, like nails tapping on a wooden lid. As I got closer, all the sounds disappeared. The air inside became thick, as if someone had just exhaled in a closed space. But what really scared me was when on Saturday morning I saw faint handprints on the glass of the coffin, from the inside. I should run. Burn the thing. Call the police. Anything. But I'm drawn in like a moth to a flame. I take off the glass cover. It's empty inside. From then on, things began to change. The bathroom mirror reflected me, standing in my black morning clothes. Every time I blinked, I saw my reflection smiling slightly, as if it knew something I didn't. One time, I even saw myself lying in a coffin, from a high angle, as if someone was looking down. I began to lose sleep. The whispers became clearer, whispers in a voice I recognized, my long-dead grandmother's voice. "Rest, little Nino," she whispered, the only name she had ever called me as a child, a name I hadn't told anyone since I was 10. The tension made me start to doubt reality. I opened my eyes to find myself standing in front of the coffin, my hand pressed against the glass. I had no idea when I had arrived. When I looked closely, the reflection in the glass was looking at me with its eyes open. Behind it was a completely different scene, a 19th century funeral parlor, with dim gaslights and dark velvet curtains, not my cold storage. I began to wonder, am I alive, or am I a dreaming corpse? The truth becomes more and more fractured as the funeral attire in the mirror becomes more detailed with each passing day. The delicate stripes, the gold chain watch hanging from the vest, the white lily pinned to the lapel, and the clock hands stopped at midnight. Desperate, I found an old piece of paper in the shipping records, with a name written on it, Cornelius Blackwood, same phone number. I call. He answered after 2 rings. Before I could say anything, he said, "You looked in the mirror." His voice was calm, tired, as if he had said it 100 times. I gave him a rundown of the situation. He interrupted me, detailing every detail: the moving coffin, the changing reflections, the whispering, the interdimensional mirrors. He even knew my childhood nickname. "How long have you had it?" he asked. 2 weeks. Tomorrow is the 14th. He was silent. Then he said softly, "You don't have much time left. My predecessor," he said, "lasted 18 days. They found him at 3 a.m., standing motionless in his shed, wearing funeral clothes that matched his reflection, although he didn't wear them in real life. Eyes closed, smiling. The doctors couldn't find anything wrong. But he insisted that he was dead, that his life up until now had been a dream in a coffin. He's still in a mental hospital. So did the 5 people before me." I asked, "Is there anything in the coffin?" "No. That's the problem. The coffin was commissioned for a man who never died," Blackwood recounted. "The man who commissioned the casket, a funeral director, went missing before the burial. His family found him 3 weeks later, walking in the desert, wearing a funeral suit, having been dead for hours. The coffin still returns to the funeral home. But from then on, whoever holds it goes through the same process: insomnia, altered reflections, time confusion, eventually no longer distinguishing between dreams and reality. That coffin," said Blackwood, "it is not empty. It's short of people, and it kept looking." I hung up. No one could help. No one could stop me. I went back into the warehouse, locked all the doors. Set up a chair in front of the entrance. I needed to see the coffin, with my own eyes. That night, when I looked into the mirror, I didn't see my reflection. I saw myself sleeping, lying there, smiling slightly, my hand resting on my chest. And for the first time in years, I felt at peace. The shrill sound of the phone made everything around me tremble, as if a door had been opened between dream and reality. The entity beside me took a step back, its head tilted toward the sound, not angry but clearly displeased. The funeral parlor flickered, once again blending with the cold metal structures and dusty racks of the warehouse. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to throw the phone to the floor, to silence it forever, to accept the simple and comforting truth that I had been dead for a long time, and the dream of life had been a false stopover between 2 worlds. But another part of me, the root, the wild, instinctive part, still held on to something unanswered. I reached into my pocket, where the sound still echoed, and pulled out the phone. On the screen was a name I hadn't seen in years: Grace, younger brother. My hands shook. Grace had died in 1995, drowned in the lake behind our house. I remembered her funeral vividly: the small casket, the white flowers, and the emptiness that followed for years. I never got over it. The phone kept vibrating. Not a system error. Not a hallucination. I swiped to answer. "Thomas," the voice came out, almost breathy, as if drawn from the very space around. "I'm dreaming. Don't let them bury me again. I'm not done yet." I opened my mouth, wanting to ask, to scream, to understand. But those words, "Don't let them bury you again," stabbed me in the back of my mind. I looked back at the entity. It was still there, silent, motionless, but the welcome on its invisible face had given way to something else: disappointment. I turned back to look at the coffin. The corpse inside, my reflection, now had its eyes open. My eyes, but no longer mine. In that gaze was a will. A hunger. A replacement. I stepped back, my fingers tightening on the phone, and for the first time since entering the warehouse, I shouted. "I am not dead. And I am not yours." The air hissed like an iron door being pulled tight, and everything around began to crack. Not broken, but peeling, like fake skin on a face that doesn't belong to a person. The entity stepped forward, not quickly, not aggressively, but with certainty. It did not need to chase. It knew all roads lead here. But this time, iron. I dashed over crates, tripping over floors, sliding through thick dust that now smelled sweet and rotten. Behind me, empty footsteps echoed, uneven, like the rhythm of a body unaccustomed to gravity. I opened the barn door and rushed out. The darkness swallowed me, but it wasn't cold, it was hot as an oven. I looked around, gasping, phone still in my hand. The screen was black. No calls. No signal. No grace. But I still living. At least until the entity decides to try again. I started noting the time. 2:13 a.m. Then 2:14. Then 2:15. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps, pause. Almost musically perfect. I tried opening the bathroom window once, hoping to discover the cause, but there was only space outside. No balcony. No porch. No tree branches that could reach that height. And most importantly, no one. I closed the door. The wind blew through the old cracks in the wall like a whisper through my teeth. The second week, the tapping spread to the bedroom window. Not just at night. Anytime I left the blinds closed. If I let in a little light, it stopped. But as soon as total darkness fell, the sound started again. I began to dream, or at least think I did. Shapes were cast on the glass, but in reverse. Not like me. Not like anyone I knew. They seemed to be trying to learn how to be human. Unnatural, like beings that had never known muscles or bones. A tilted head, shoulders twisted the wrong way, eyes askew. Once, I woke in the middle of the night and saw a figure standing at the kitchen window, on the other side of the glass. I turned on the light. There was no one. I began to doubt myself. Maybe it was the lack of sleep, maybe it was the stress. But the whispers remained. Different, no longer as clear as my name, but in half phrases. He left the door open. That reflection is not him. We're close. One morning I found fingerprints on the inside of my bathroom window. They were clearly from the inside, but I had no memory of ever touching it. When I wiped them away, the condensation had formed a scribble. Back off. I took a few days off. The reason, mental health. But even on those days at home, in the light of day, I began to see strange details in the mirror. A chair I was sure didn't belong in. A shadow flitting across the back hall. A family photo I'd never taken. And always me, but not quite me, like the person was starting to look different. One night, the knocking was so loud it cracked the window. I ran out, but nothing. I hammered a nail into the frame, taped the glass back together, and pulled the curtains shut as if the window had never been there. But when I turned around, the knocking came again, this time, from behind the bathroom mirror. I rushed over and pulled the mirror off the wall. But there was nothing behind it, just cold plaster. I threw the mirror to the floor. It shattered. Among the pieces, one reflected the room, without me. I closed all the blinds. I unplugged all the cameras, covered all the reflective surfaces. I have lived in an apartment covered in black ice since then. But I no longer dream. I can no longer eat. The photos I have taken lately no longer recognize my face. One morning, as I looked in the mirror in a public elevator, I saw nothing but the hallway behind me, and a figure walking toward me. The whispering grew stronger. Like a chant compressed in the wood, compressed over time, it began to leak little by little into my living space. I tried turning on the outdoor light, to test it. But every time the light came on, the thing, the tree, stood still, as if it had never moved. Only when the darkness fell over it did the changes become apparent. On the 18th night, I woke at 2:17 a.m. Not to a sound. Not to a nightmare. But to a feeling, like someone was looking at me from behind the wall. I lay still in the dark, not daring to breathe, my ears trying to distinguish the familiar tapping on the wood and something else. There was a rustling sound, like twigs rubbing together. Then a small crack, the sound of dry tendons breaking. I got out of bed. Not out of curiosity, but out of instinct, as if I didn't see it, something worse would happen. I walked softly to the bathroom window, not drawing the curtain this time. I wanted to see it, whatever it was. And there, in the dim light of the flickering yard light, was the stump. But it is no longer a tree stump. The thing stood taller than last night. Maybe 6 feet. The body still had the rough texture of wood, but it was humanoid now, slender, with unnaturally long arms hanging down like dry branches, fingers branching out in tiny branches, trembling even without the wind. And the face, no longer random rings of wood. It was a real face, with a mouth open, eyes dripping black like clotted blood, empty but full of hatred. It looked straight at me. Unblinking. I took a step back. 1 step. 2. Then I ran to my room, slammed the door, and barricaded it with a chair. I didn't sleep that night, just sat there with my phone in my arms, watching the minutes tick by. Every little sound startled me. I waited for daylight like a drowning man waiting to be pulled ashore. The next morning, I ran outside. The stump was still there, small and silent and harmless. There was no sign that it had moved. But the ground around it, now turned over. As if something that had been buried had come up. I considered calling the building management. But what to say? I think the tree in the yard is watching me. They would laugh at me, or worse, call the police for causing trouble. So I kept quiet. But from then on, I was no longer myself. I didn't just hear the whispers at night. I started hearing them during the day, in the wind, in the sound of cars, even between the sentences of my colleagues. All in the same rhythm, 7 seconds. Always 7 seconds. I began to dream that I was standing in the yard, naked, my flesh turned to wood, and the tree was whispering in my ear with my own voice. It said that I had been chosen. That one day, I would replace it. That I had entered into an irreversible contract, just because it's been too long. I don't know how much longer I can keep writing this. But if you're reading this, and if you have a tree stump in your yard, especially one that looks out of place, don't look directly at it. Don't let it look back you. Because once you see its eyes blink, it was too late. I dressed faster than usual, skipped breakfast, and left the apartment as if I were running away from myself. On the way to work, I checked my shoulders in the rearview mirror several times. The dark spots looked like bruises or tiny roots, spreading faintly under my skin. I tried to reason, allergic reactions, maybe stress, but my mind didn't stop at the medical. I thought of the tree, the smell of sap, and the breathing symbols on the bark. At work, I couldn't concentrate. Every time I touched the keyboard, my skin felt sticky, like my palms were seeping sap. Every click sounded like cutting into dry wood in my ears. And I started to hear it, whisper, not from outside, but from inside my head. No longer an echo from the window, but a murmur close to my ear, like an ancient lullaby that I had never learned, but seemed to know by heart. At first, I thought I was imagining things. But at noon, while washing my hands in the bathroom, I saw a man standing behind me in the mirror. A tall, blurry figure, faceless. I turned my head, no one. Looked again, still no one. But the feeling I am not alone anymore then not disappear. I left early that day. Without explaining anything to my colleagues, I just nodded and walked down the sidewalk like a lost soul. I headed straight to the library. Not to read more about the history of the land, but to find anything related to Mirror. I found an old book in the folklore section. No clear title, just a dark cover with a faint engraving that almost resembled the symbol on the tree last night. There was a passage I flipped to, drawn by instinct. There are mirrors that do not reflect our world, but open gates to another land, where time breathes with the rhythm of tree roots, and the soul needs no form. I closed the book immediately, my heart pounding. My palms were wet now, but not sweat. It was plastic, amber in color, thick and glossy like gently simmering honey. That evening, when I returned to the apartment, I stayed away from the window. But no matter where I sat, I could hear the sound. Slow beat, like the heartbeat of a giant creature sleeping under the floor. No one else heard it. No one else felt it. Only me. And when I looked in the mirror, I saw myself smile even though my face was completely motionless. I didn't sleep that night. Or if I did, it was a dream state that wasn't a dream, a floating blur that I couldn't tell apart from waking. I woke up, or thought I did, at 2:47 a.m., standing in the middle of the living room, my bare feet on the cold tile floor. The room was completely dark, but I could see every object around me as clearly as if the light were coming from inside my eyes. I looked down at my hands. My palms were oozing a sticky, resinous substance, dark brown, glistening in the invisible light. I heard the glass rattle. But I didn't turn around. I know. The door is open. Enida's standing behind me. I walked slowly toward the mirror in the bedroom. The mirror reflected nothing. No me, no darkness. Just a thick blackness, like looking down a well. I raised my hand, in the mirror, the other hand also raised, but a beat slower. I tilted my head. The image in the mirror did not tilt. It kept looking straight at me, as if waiting for an instruction. As if I am no longer in control. I raised my hand and drew a vague circle on the glass with the resin seeping from my fingertips. As I finished the last stroke, mirror shake, like water that someone had just thrown a stone into. From within, an image gradually emerged, not me, not the room, but tree root. It was growing, its roots clinging to the walls, its tips piercing the ceiling, and each leaf seemed to whisper. I stepped back. And this time, non-retrograde reflection. It was still there, in the mirror. I, or a version of me, was smiling, blood dripping from my mouth, and my eyes were black as sap about to flow out. I turn on the light. The mirror is empty. The next morning, I woke up on the floor, my head pounding. My wrists were covered in long scratches, as if I had tried to climb over a barbed wire fence. The refrigerator was open, food strewn about. The bathroom light had been on all night. And my pillow, soaked with sweet sap. The scariest thing wasn't what I saw. But I am not afraid anymore. I began to look forward to the night. I began to turn off the lights in the house. I stopped looking in the mirror during the day. I felt a strange quiet, as if I was no longer alone. Something had come, and it stayed in me, flowing with my veins, breathing with my breath. I smile more when I am alone. I start to hear someone calling my name when I am in the shower, or cooking. And I answer, naturally, as if I have known it for a long time. That night, I drew the symbol I saw on the tree trunk, with the sap that flowed from my own hand, on my bedroom mirror. It lights up. And I disappeared from the room in a blink of an eye, only the reflection remained standing there, smiling contentedly, hand raised in greeting. I woke up in the woods. Not in the romantic movie kind of way, where the main character wakes up to sunlight filtering through the trees. No birdsong, no gentle breeze. Just heavy silence, a silence that every cell in me was wary of. The ground beneath me was damp, the tree roots twisted like fingers scratching at the back of my shirt. There was dried blood on my forehead, and on my right arm, tree trunk symbol, now tattooed into the flesh, unable to be washed off. I don't remember leaving home. No car. No phone. Just something. Sense of urgency pulled me further, deeper into the woods behind the farm that I had never set foot in. I wasn't hungry or thirsty, but my chest ached as if it was squeezing something that didn't belong to me. I walked along the nameless path, and each step seemed to have left an old mark. This feeling was familiar, but not mine. Finally, I came to a hollow where there was a black pond. Its surface was smooth as a mirror, reflecting the moonless, starless sky above. I knelt at the edge of the pond. And see me in there. Not my current form, but me, literally. Me a month ago. Eyes still bright, face still full of vitality, no trace of the decay that is gradually clinging to me now. But the image no longer mimics my movements. It looked at me with fear. Please, it whispered, don't let it take over. I fell backwards in shock. The reflection in the pond was still looking at me, tears streaming down its face, while I, the one lying on the ground, burst out laughing uncontrollably. I understand. I'm not being possessed. I am a clone. The clone was made from the mirror. From the forest. From sap and roots, from wordless whispers. I am the replacement, born before the old one died. An original is stuck, in some mirror world, is still desperately resisting. That night, I returned home. From the outside, the farmhouse looked as normal as ever, except, all the windows were covered with black canvas, as if someone was afraid the light from inside would leak out. I entered the house. It was dark, but I could see every corner. The smell of resin was part of the air. The floors were sticky. The walls were stained with something like moss or dried blood. Every mirror in the house was broken, except one and only. The mirror in the basement. The mirror is attached to the iron cage. I go down. The basement was so cold that it smoked. The mirror was there, intact, shining like it had just been cleaned, and the iron cage has opened. Inside were deep scratches to the metal, and a line of words written in blood. I'm still here. I walked to the mirror. There was no reflection. Just darkness, swirling like the eye of a storm. I reached out and touched it. This time, the mirror swallowed my hand like jelly. And from within, another hand grabbed my wrist, pull hard. I didn't go to work that morning. I couldn't. My body felt as if it were covered in something sticky, itchy, and heavy, even though my skin had been scrubbed until it bled. I sat in the dark apartment, the daylight unable to penetrate the heavy curtains, or perhaps, as I began to suspect, the light no longer wanted to. When I looked in the mirror, my eyes had changed. The irises were a deep brown, almost black, as if sap had seeped into the depths of my eyes. The bark flecks spread up my neck and jaw, spiraling like growth rings. I no longer felt fear. There was only acceptance. Not surrender, but a hollow stillness, like a tree standing still in the wind, enduring and silent. I began to dream while I was awake. Dreams of tree roots crawling across the wood floor, through the carpet, into my skin. I could feel each root curling around my ribs, gently but inexorably. The whispers in my head had a clearer structure now. I no longer had to translate. I just understood. They called me the empty shell, a skin ready for replacement. That evening, I cut a small piece of skin where the darkest spots were clustered, as if to see what was underneath. What I found was not blood. It was sap. Thick, amber, sweet, dripping slowly onto my hand and sticking to my skin. I wasn't alarmed. On the contrary, I felt relieved. I changed into a rough cloth shirt, like the ones I had seen in native ceremonial drawings. I stepped out into the yard for the first time, past the fence I had always avoided. No one stopped me. No one even saw me. The tree had changed completely. It was taller, darker, and seemed to be waiting. The symbols on its bark now glinted as if they had been etched in charcoal. I knelt, placed my hands on its cracked surface, and closed my eyes. A drum beat sounded from somewhere underground. Voices merged into one. No longer whispers, but an ancient song, endless. I no longer felt like an individual. I was a shell. A fragment. A part of the old forest, its heart cut out and trying to reclaim it. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the courtyard. All around me was forest. Not forest in the biological sense, but a more primal one, a place where time did not flow but existed as mist. And I saw the others, standing still, silent, each one with their skin cracking like bark, revealing the golden sap inside. They looked at me. Not with their eyes. With acceptance. One of them nodded. And I understood, the exchange ritual was complete.